everyone, and welcome back to the Wednesday Witterer. My name is Jorge Shaft, and joining me in the studio today is the realization that we're living in a very interesting situation right now. The American election, from time of recording, happened just yesterday, and multiple states are still counting. But what exactly is the American political system? How does it work? And why did it manage to elect this man called Donald Trump to be the president when he apparently didn't have all of the votes, right? Well, let's go for it. The United States of America is a vast country in, well, the American continent, specifically North America, so famed because it is almost entirely to the west of South America. It is a pretty decently sized continent, a lot of land there, and it's home to several fairly sizable nations. The United States covers a lot of. I've just realised I've kind of forgotten to check up on to get like a source for all the basics because numbers. The United States has a total land area. That's it. Has a total land area of 9,147,590 square kilometers. It has also got of total land area. In its population, according to Wikipedia's estimates, it has got 328 million people, and it has a GDP of a vast amount worth $20.807 trillion per capita as well. The country has a very high for global standards GDP with $63,051 per person. But this vast country covering a huge land area with millions and millions of people will, of course, need to be governed. It needs to be controlled. And the question of how to do that in the American case is pretty unique. The United States didn't started out in a way that, on the one hand, sounds incredibly similar to many others, but in the other hand, really isn't. It started out in a rebellion. It was originally at the beginning a revolt by the 13 colonies against the British Empire's taxations, really. They believed that the taxes were all too high and that all of these kind of charges, especially like the stamp tax, rates on tea, were inexcusable, and they were not going to tolerate all these payments whatsoever. Initially, the idea of independence was actually a very deeply unpopular one. In the first year of the American War for Independence, actually only about 29% is estimated of people supported the idea of independence. Even among the rebel side, it was very much not popular. But as the war continued, and as lives were lost and cities were razed to the ground, the rebel side became radicalized, and they got inspired by a greater call, a higher call than just merely we don't like some of these taxes. They started arguing for freedom. They started arguing that every man should have the right to live their life, to be happy, and to pursue their own goals. With the exception, of course, of the slaves in the southern states and women and less, though, these ideals helped to carry forth the rebel armies against Britain and to win. The British Empire was kicked out back to Canada in the north or to the Caribbean to the south. And the United States was now this new country ruling a fairly large area with many sort of disparate colonies. These colonies initially tried to work in a very, very loose confederation style of government. But when it became clear that states were marching their own state militias on each other, that there was going to be a bit of an issue unless there was a stronger centralized authority. Hence, then in the 1790s, why the sort of founders all got together and they created the US Constitution. Constitution has gone on now for almost 300 years to be the foundation stone, the all-inclusive. I'm not said 300, it's actually more 200, but anyway, the all-inclusive, the all-pervading final document on how the American system works. So let's have what does it say? What does the Constitution argue for? And what did they decide to set out? Well, the Constitution set out on its very, very basics a pretty simple little idea. In its preamble, the Constitution argued, according to constitution.congress.gov, quote, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." It argued, the belief of it was, the fundamental idea was that no one person or one group of people should ever be too powerful. They argue the idea that these colonists all feared was the idea of another King George rising up in America, coming out there and running roughshod on everybody. That idea has, though it's been threatened, largely held true over the past sort of 200 and something odd years that the United States has existed. Nobody has indeed been a tyrant, has been like a dictator, which is definitely a much longer and more admirable record than a great many countries can attest to. It didn't even need to enforce its rules quite as much as you might think. Only one President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1940s and 30s, has ever stayed for more than 2 terms. And now that's not even possible anymore because the Constitution was amended to make a point of having there not being a president who's there for too long. But what about this Constitution? What does it argue? And what is the structure that it has set up from the ground to wherever? Well, first, Article 1, Section 1, is that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Section 2 says that the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every 2nd year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications prerequisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. In practice, what this has meant is that every state sends, in a way that we in Britain will be very familiar, individuals in a series of elections off to the Congress. House of Representatives is often billed as the aspect of the legislature that represents the people. Whether it does so or not well, that's a debate that we'll have for later. But for now, what is important to say is the House of Representatives is in theory part of the sort of legislative branch of the government that deals with, oh hey, the people have a problem, let's try and do something about it. By contrast, we have the second branch, which is the Senate. Well, of the legislature, though. Get ready for this sort of complicated thing, by the way, because it's going to get complex. Anyway, then we have the Senate. Now, the Senate was originally an appointed body, but this was changed in an amendment later to be elected. But the numbers and the idea of it still stay the same. Every state, regardless of how large or small, or how rich or poor they were, would elect 2 senators to go and represent them in this august body. The Senate is often seen as the more senior of the houses, more prestige and more power associated with it. That translates not only in the fact that the senators have much longer terms, 6 years for each, but then also in the fact that the Senate doesn't have its elections all at once. The Senate actually only has 1/3 of its members at any one time up for election on any one election. They have this year, for example, the state of Kentucky had a man up for the Senate, not in an election, but the state of Wisconsin did not, because in Wisconsin, both of those senators had their terms, start on a different election. So we're now in this strange situation now already, where we've got 2 branches of the legislature, for the politicians. One that's having an election every 2 years for all of them, in a very kind of first past the post electoral system style. And then also we have a Senate where 1/3 of them vote for election at any given time. They serve 6-year terms and they have more powers. But okay, powers over whom? Speaking of powers, what powers does this Congress have, and why is it actually so limited? Well, I'll tell you all about that after these other people have a chat. Catch you soon.
Whoa, Relax Radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট ইজ 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292 আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com, RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax Relax Radio.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Wednesday Witterer with me, George Shaft. Yeah, I need to get that sort of practice really sorted. Like, it's a Wednesday Witterer with George Shaft, hosted by me, George Shaft. Anyway, I've been doing my deep dive at the moment on the American political system, and in the last segment, I established three main important things. One was the fact that America started in rebellion in the fires of a revolutionary war against the British Empire. I talked about the fact that they established a constitution that, at its heart, at its central, was very worried about the idea of power, of how much power any one person could wield. And then I talked about the legislature, about the fact that the laws are actually made by these two branches, these two chambers in what they call Congress. But let's go back to power. Because see, power's really nice, actually. I'm just gonna say it, sound like every movie villain that has ever existed, but it's true. With power, you can do whatever you like. You can change the world, enrich yourself, help the ones you love. But too much power in any one person usually results in bad things for everyone else. And it was with this in mind that the founders of the United States of America, when they were thinking about their constitution, made a huge point of thinking who gets power, when, how, and what can they do with it? Well, in this vein, they decided to do a bit of a radical choice for the time, which was they split it up. They took that power, and they hit it with a hammer, and then distributed the shards to three competing branches of the government, or if you consider the states, but we'll get to that later. The federal government, at its core, has three branches to it, each holding different powers and holding every incentive in the world to go and fight each other. I already discussed the legislature, which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. They have the powers to draft, vote on, and decide laws. Theoretically, only Congress actually has the power to declare war, though in actual realities, things have changed a little bit since the days of the founders on that front. But even with all of that still leaves two extra branches. Let's discuss the high profile one, the one that everybody immediately knows, and immediately is like, yeah, oh, I can name this person. Very simple one. Who is, just off the top of your head, let me ask, who is the President of the United States of America? Now, I say this in a slightly awkward time of recording, because there is a recount going on because there are counts going on in 8 states over an election that has just happened, and now it's so down to the wire and so close, but we don't actually know quite who is the president yet. But we do know but if I'd said, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, who was the president of the United States, it would have been extremely quick and obvious for people to just know. Like, oh yeah, Donald Trump. Why? Why do you know that man's name? And why does it matter who is the president? Well, the presidency is the executive branch. It is, in theory, the branch that is in control of, hey, let's implement the rules that the Congress, the legislature, voted on and decided would be there. Because don't forget, I've discussed the fact that the Congress, the legislature, has the power to draft and to sign and make laws. But the presidency has a long tradition with that too. They have to, first start they enforce the laws. They're the guys who go, yeah, so we have this law that Congress has just made, it's up to us to decide how to implement that. But that's a lot of power, don't you think? That's a lot of power in and of itself to go, yeah, actually, the Congress, they just made this law, but I don't like that law, so what we're going to do is implement it in a really half-hearted way. That's entirely something within the power of the president to do. The other thing also that the president has that, is maybe more relevant for everyone else in the world is they're, if you will, a last resort. They are an emergency position in charge. They always are sort of theoretically completely in charge of the military. You see, back in the day, cast your minds back to that early Revolutionary War when America just got its independence. It was being led, and it was being led, of course, by a very, by all accounts, charismatic, intelligent general called George Washington. Now, George Washington, being a general, had a few ideas about, how to lead armies. And so when the early states all gave him the presidency and also offered him the position of a king, and the fact that he said no, very relevant, very quickly, soon. He went, actually, all right, sure, I'll be in charge. But, I'm a general, so I guess I'll keep like the army on board as well, be in charge of them too. But crucially, as I mentioned before, he said he would not be a king. George Washington decided he'd just sit for 2 terms, and then he'll just leave, bow out, go and live a life as, well, at the time, the richest man in America. That's had profound impacts on the presidency. Because you see, even though it is so powerful, you're the guy in charge, as the president, you're the guy in charge of enforcing all of the laws. Every civil servant directly obeys your orders, including the army. But you're not a king. You're not a dictator. You're not someone who is just uncontrollably in power. Somebody who is restrained by rules on how to work things out. Clearest example of rules, of what you can do or can't do as the president, is actually in that very self-same lawmaking abilities. Since Congress is the only one who can actually make laws, if, say, the president wakes up and goes, I want to make it illegal for someone to, something, I'm thinking like all sorts of like random things, like, throw phones into the air. If the president woke up and went, like, I want to make it illegal to throw phones, they can't do anything. The best they can do is go to Congress and go, hey, Congress, I would really love it if you made a rule that said that throwing phones was illegal. And Congress can then turn around and say no. And they'd be completely within their rights, and there would be no problem whatsoever. The actual implications and the real world way this is translated, it's a case of like your mileage may vary. In truth, the president has the presidency, the office, and the many individuals who've sat in there have found creative ways to to kind of circumvent that. The most recent and the most prominent, for anybody who's watching, at the time when I'm recording, is the idea of the executive order. Basically, the executive order is the idea that, hey, you're in charge of the civil servants as the president. You're the guy in charge of like what do all the soldiers and the bureaucrats do. So why not just write them instructions? And in that, you can write instructions that go, hey, by the way, I'm interpreting this law that's just been written in a slightly different way than what the politicians all said that should be done. I actually want it implemented in this way. It's lawmaking by any other name, really. But, hey, it's technically different, so it's technically correct, right? In addition, the presidency has, over the past 200 years, found a very, very big power that is controversial, but kind of just been allowed to happen. And that's, remember when I mentioned that the president is the commander in chief. They are the guys in charge of the army. Well, Congress may have the power to declare war, but they don't have the power to move armies. So what presidents realized during the Cold War, after the Second World War, was they realized, well, going through Congress to declare war takes a long time. It doesn't take a very long time. If I just go to the army, to the troops, and go, hey, soldiers, I want you to go to Iraq. Now, just march over to Iraq right now. Well, the real world reality of, oh, hey, all of these soldiers have now marched into Iraq is, of course, Iraq starts to fight back against the US forces. Of course, the US forces fight against the Iraqis, and boom, we in practice now have a war. This is why, actually, from a technical and from a legal point of view, all of America's wars since the Second World War have actually not been wars. The Vietnam War, no, that's just advisors who were deployed, moved by the president to help out South Vietnam. The Iraq War, oh no, the president just turned around and said, hey, army, I want you to go to Iraq today. The war in Afghanistan, still ongoing. Same thing. Hey, soldiers, I want you to go to Afghanistan right now. It's a sneaky little workaround. It's a sneaky dodge. But hey, welcome to the American system. Sneaky dodges and workarounds are par for the course. It sounds like a huge problem, in fact. Somebody should be given the power to look at the laws, look at the rules, and make the decisions like, hey, no, that's not allowed. That's against the spirit. That's against the intentions. That's against the way in which that was actually written down. You'd think that maybe there should be some way of figuring that out. Well, there is. We'll find out about them later. The last thing I want to say, though, is about the president is the American system made a huge point that there should be a separation of powers. That the legislature and the president, or the executive, as they call it, have, if you will, competing powers and different interests. This is why the president was actually is elected in a separate election from all of the members of Congress. But the founders were again very worried at the prospect of one group seizing control. And that included, of course, the population as a whole, counterproductive as that and counterintuitive as that might feel to say in the modern context nowadays. That and of course the fact that there was a huge discussion and argument about whether slaves should count as citizens, with half of the states going, yes, they should, but they shouldn't be voting, and the other states and the northern states going, what? No, if they're citizens, then they should be voting in elections. What the hell is wrong with you? The solution that the states decided on way back in the 1790s was a compromise where they went, all right, slaves will count as like some people, but with no vote. But in exchange, the way in which the election is going to be held will mean that basically this power of having all the citizens will be kind of enshrined. The messy, ugly creation from that was the Electoral College. The idea of having a straight election was very tempting and definitely argued for by a bunch of the founders. But the reality of it was a bit trickier. After all, a horse ride from, South Carolina all the way to the capital would be a very long affair. Weeks, months. A ship would be faster, but not that much faster. And we're still talking about days and days and days before you can talk to anyone. So how would you How do you work with that? Well, the solution that the founders came up with when they were writing the US Constitution was to make the elections not really be elections. Instead, elections for the president are in a way votes for delegates instead. What you'd do is you'd have like someone running for president, and no, the theory anyway. And then in each of the states, you would have individuals go like, hey, I will vote in the delegates for this man who is running for president. You know, I like him. I think he's cool. Vote me to be the representative. It's a cheeky little workaround, a little bit of a two-step system. But I mean, for the 1790s, not that bad an idea. Of course, in the modern days, and you know, there's been some evolution on this idea. How could there not within 200 years? But in practice, what this means now is that the election that just happened from time of recording last night wasn't technically an election. What it technically was all of the states deciding which set of delegates do they want to send to the convention, to all go together and say, hey, I want this person to be the president. It's complicated, and I could definitely get very lost in the weeds, talking forever about, you know, the rules and the ways in which all of these delegates work out. But the take-home message for now is the fact that the president is elected by essentially an indirect electoral system involving delegates and involving, you know, individuals who then meet up later to have their, if you will, the real election. But I did talk about the fact that there's all these workarounds. That there's all these kind of different, if you will, bad faith ways of interpreting rules, of circumventing, what's being said. After all, I've already talked about how the presidency has figured out a cheeky little way of declaring war without actually declaring war. It sounds like there should be a referee. There should be someone out there who sits at the back and goes, wait, no, you're breaking the rules. That's not how it works. Well, luckily, the founders actually did think about that when they were writing the American Constitution in the 1790s. But we will get to them after these other people have a chat. Catch you all again very, very soon.
Whoa, Relaks Radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট ইজ 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292 আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relaks Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist, or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com, RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax Radio.
Okay, that was a terrible, terrible simulation of a referee's whistle. But well, referees are important in a football match when you have all the different sort of players running around, kicking a ball, and going on doing all their stuff. You need someone in the middle to look at that and go, "Hey, hey, you're breaking the rules." But who does that in the American political system, and how does it actually pan out? We've discussed we have discussed a whole bunch of different ways in which the American political system is set up. We've talked about how its origins was a violent rebellion against the British Empire, and which resulted in a nascent new colony that valued the idea of freedom and was very afraid of the idea of one individual having too much power. We've talked about how the Constitution breaks up that power already between two separate branches of government. One being the legislature, which is the Congress consisting of a House of Representatives and a Senate that has the power to write laws. But their powers are clashing against the power of the executive or the presidency of a one commander in chief who is officially the person in charge of all of the state workers and is the one who writes like all of the sort of rules and guidelines on what they are supposed to do, including such cheeky powers as like, hey, yeah, you soldiers, go march over there, and I won't need to have to declare war. We'll just be fighting. But someone has to be the mediator, doesn't they? If you've just got these two different power structures just sitting there constantly butting heads, one surely is going to win. Well, if you think of it like this, though, if you have 2 ears of corn, you try to lean them together, they're just going to fall. But 3, you lean them all together in like a little triangle, and they hold each other up, and we'll just stay there. That's where the third one comes in, the judiciary. Judges have a long, long tradition in the American political system. America came from, used to be a colony of Britain, which has been the pioneer of the idea of the common law. Common law is, in essence, the idea that a judge should be able to look at, a court case, look at, some situation and go, hey, the laws don't actually really cover this situation properly. But no, we have a situation here right now, so I'm just going to say that the laws mean that, for your court case, this is the solution. It's controversial, the common law system, and those legal debates will rage on forever and ever. But in practice, what it's meant is that judges, in essence, have the ability to go, well, the rules as written go against the law. They go against the Constitution. We should, change that, get rid of it. And hence the judiciary. The judicial branch is appointed. It has, except for a handful of areas in the US where they are elected judges for like state positions, most of the time, judges in the United States are appointed. They are appointed by the Congress and by the president. The other two branches of government having this very firm control over the judiciary, weakening their powers by going, hey, if you don't do what we say, we won't promote you. But the judiciary still has the power then to look at any law that the Congress has written or any executive order that the president has issued out to all of the state workers and just go, hey, that goes against the Constitution. After all, the Constitution is pretty clear on a lot of what it wants. Now, there's been a lot of cases where it goes, hey, yeah, so you've just said this rule that does this, but the Constitution says something else. One example, one sort of argument I can think of, just looking at it, is, for example, let's go with, all right, So let's go back to the year 2008. In the year 2008, there was a pensioner in the city of Washington D.C. who suffered a break-in. A burglar kind of came in and stole a bunch of his stuff. And this pensioner, sorry if, by the way, I'm misremembering the circumstances, but Heller was thought like, man, wouldn't it have been cool if I could have defended myself? Well, an old man could probably defend his house much better with a gun. And that's actually a right that is enshrined in the American Constitution. The Second Amendment famously reads, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." And so he thought, well, but the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., has these laws meaning that I can't have a handgun, a small little firearm for me as an old man to have. I'm gonna sue and try and get that changed. This case went to the courts, and it went through the court system to the Supreme Court, where they looked at Washington D.C.'s gun control laws. They looked at the Second Amendment and went, yeah, actually, the Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The gun control is unconstitutional. They struck it down. Heller versus Washington, D.C. is definitely a controversial court case, but it is illustrative of just one way in which the Supreme Court, the judiciary, plays a role within the American political system. Speaking of which, who is that Supreme Court? Well, all of those different judges, all of those different attorneys, when they climb through the ranks in the judiciary, they get appointed until they reach the highest court. The highest court of the land is called the Supreme Court. In essence, in many ways, the Supreme Court is the most powerful position in America, in the American political system. The judges who are appointed to the Supreme Court get to sit there for life. And a fair number of them do, in fact, sit there till they're at very, very old age and die while in office. The Supreme Court has the power to, if you will, willy-nilly decide, yes, this violates the Constitution. No, this doesn't violate the Constitution. But don't worry. The founders did think about, what if the judges, though, got all power mad and decided we could actually do whatever we want and we will be the new dictators? Which, again, as I mentioned earlier, when America was founded in a violent revolution, they were worried about freedom and about the fact that one group or individual might take too much power. That's why they split up the government into the three different branches. Now, the federal government, they got the legislature itself split in two of all the politicians arguing about writing laws. You have the executive, the presidency, arguing about how to implement those laws, how to make them reality. And now we've got the judiciary arguing on but how exactly do you interpret those laws that the legislature has just written and which the presidency is trying to enact? But of course, there's a weakness there. The judiciary, for example, can't decide the agenda. The only way that the judiciary could possibly go, so there's some. I'll picture this scenario like this. Imagine you are a Supreme Court judge, and you decide, you know what? I really want. Let's go back to the example I kind of toyed with earlier. It's I really wish it was illegal to throw phones at people, to throw phones at things. That's just inexcusable. I don't like that. I want there to be a law against it. Well, you can't write a law, though, to say that, because you're just a judge. You're not a politician in the Congress. You also can't just go to the the civil servants. Go, hey, look, I know that Congress hasn't written a law on this yet, but I want to sort of like in action, in actuality, go against people who are throwing phones. But well, what you can do in the judiciary is you could wait. You could wait for a case that maybe someone somewhere has some dispute which they send to the courts that is related to that. And it's only at that moment that you go, aha, see, this is how this is why this whole thing is unconstitutional. And that's why here's it, this court case proves that throwing phones is actually against the Constitution. So there we go. But then again, of course, it's not quite that simple. The Supreme Court itself has 9 judges on it. And if you're a Supreme Court justice, you're going to need to just convince the other 8 judges to go along with you. And remember, even though it would on paper be extremely powerful, the fact that these people are appointed for life to this post, in the real world, it often translates to the fact that these people are in essence the least corruptible of the lot. After all, because they've just been appointed for life to this extremely powerful position, where are you going to upgrade to? Where are you going to go from Supreme Court justice to, greener pastures? A lot of politicians, of course, go later for like speaking tours, or they take like consultancies with big companies that pay way more than, their salaries as politicians did. But judges are paid pretty well. They get pretty good life security, very, very little press compared to the power that they actually have. Supreme Court justice is, it's rocking, it's solid. But of course, the American political system, in the face of what could be a tyranny of the judiciary, made a point of implementing some systems to make sure that they don't get too big for their boots. The president and the judiciary can, of course, be removed. They can be removed by the legislature deciding to go through a motion called impeachment. Donald Trump is actually unique in that he is the 3rd president to have ever been impeached, but he's not been removed. Why? Well, impeachment is this. If you want someone very important, very powerful to be fired, you can't just fire them. Why? They're too powerful. That's like, what would be the point of having someone be, the president, if then there's somebody else on top of them who could just go, yeah, you're fired today. But what you can do is you can have the legislature, the politicians, all go, hey, we're all going to vote now to decide that we don't like this person, we want them fired. But, hey, you might be granting too much power to this one group of people. So the founders split up that power too. They went, okay, the House of Representatives is the one who does impeachment. They're the ones who all go together and go, hey, we don't like this person, we want them gone. But it's the Senate which then actually takes that motion from the House and then goes, all right, let's see whether there's something to it. Let's see whether the House was actually right to go, yeah, we don't like this guy, get rid of him. It's in many ways, it's pretty ingenious. You've got a system, that frankly perfectly encapsulates the exact founders, preferences, their worries. No one group of people are too powerful. You have a legislature that's split in two, they're arguing over what laws to pass. Theoretically, the most powerful of them all because they're the ones who make the laws, but that's all they can do. You then have a presidency, theoretically, an almighty lord over the United States, of the power to command all of the civil servants and all of the soldiers to do whatever they like. But on the other hand, they have a pretty strict way of sort of interpreting those rules, and they can't make any new rules on what they should be doing. After all, they can't interpret the laws because that's the job of the judiciary, the judges. They're the ones who look at all these laws that the legislature have passed and went, okay, this is what it means. When they say this word, this is how you interpret that one word. And of course, if both the president and the judges get too big for their boots or, soil the office in some way, the legislature can turn around and go, yeah, well, we just rewrote the laws, and we also are now writing a law to say, we don't like you, go away. But what about the people? And what about their power? Well, I did discuss kinda the way in which they have their say. They vote for politicians to the Congress, and they vote for the delegates who then go on to represent and decide who is the president. But that's not the end of the story, not by a long shot, because there is some other way in which their power could be expressed. And that is the rules of their own community. Or another way of putting it, the states. I'll talk all about the states just after these other people have a chat. Catch you all again very, very soon.
Whoa, Relaks Radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট ইজ 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292 আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relaks Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relaks proudly presents Relaks Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaksmedia.com, RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax Radio.
Hello, and hello again. Welcome to the Wednesday Witterer with Jorge Shaft, hosted by me, Jorge Shaft, as I take my deep dive on the discussions of the American political system. Over in the United States, as I am currently talking, multiple states are in the midst of counting their ballots. Some states are taking way longer than others to figure out how many there are and who they're all going for. But what is that? What does that word mean? What is a state? And what is their role in this United States of America? We've discussed a lot about the American political system already over the past hour. We've discussed the fact that its history was born in violent revolt. And in that violent revolt, they learned to fear the power that a single overmighty individual or group might wield. They decided, with those fears in mind, to write the American Constitution, which set out to split the government into 3 separate branches. The first one being the legislature, which is itself split into 2 different chambers, which has the power, of all of those politicians put together, to write the laws and to, if you will, set the agenda. They vested then the power of the army and the civil servants into the presidency. Originally a general, but now, like, if you will, theoretically the chief civil servant, elected by a slightly arcane political voting system, but still there, if you will, to kind of enforce the laws, to make them a reality. Then finally, there was the judiciary, judges appointed by the other 2 branches, and at their fear, and risking always removal by them too, have the power to interpret the laws and has the power to go, hey, yeah, this is what the rules actually meant. What do you think, though? Do you think that I'm giving a fair account? Do you think I'm accurately describing them? Call the studio if you think so or don't think so. The number is 07852 472 3 and 473. You are listening to the Wednesday Witterer with Jorge Shaft, hosted by me, Jorge Shaft, on Relaks Radio. And I'm now curious, what exactly is a state? Well, back in the original days of British colonialism, the colonialism wasn't exactly done by one single set group, nor was it done with this idea of all being one country overall. Different groups of peoples settled in different places. Some were religious refugees fleeing persecution back in the mainland. Others were economic prospectors looking to make a quick fortune out there on the frontiers, with the intention of maybe setting up some big mansion and living off the profits for the rest of their life. Others were just trying out their luck, desperate to run away from poverty and misery back at home. And if maybe there's the chance of a small farm out there in the Americas, why not go for it? But when they did that, those different impulses, those different creations, created different political entities. They created, over time, what became known as states. Different, if you will, geographic mini countries that all had their own laws, their own agendas, their own preferences, their own cultures to, do what they liked. Getting the United States to work together as a country has proven very difficult with all of these states. They even fought a civil war over it, when the states of the North and the states of the South had their disagreements over whether people should be enslaved become so intense that it ended up leading to 4 years of great bloodshed and razing of cities and hundreds of thousands of people dead. Still to this day, the American Civil War was the greatest loss of life in any war on the American continent ever. But what did that set out? What did it establish? Because you see, if you listen to the apologists for the southern states, they often insist that no, the southern states weren't actually fighting over slavery, even though the overwhelming historical consensus, yes, they did. But they would argue that it was actually over states' rights. And on that, well, they're not 100% wrong. After all, it was technically the state's right to own slaves. But what did it establish? And what did the Civil War end up meaning for these entities? States are, in essence, if you will, mini countries, as I established. They are little, self-contained, almost kind of like sovereign, but not quite, little areas that have their own laws and their own ways of doing things. Indeed, the Constitution was crystal clear on this, with the 10th Amendment arguing that, hey, anything that we say here in fact, I'm just going to get it there. The 10th Amendment literally just reads, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. There's a huge swathe of different laws that applies only to the states. Things like taxation. Some states don't even have sales tax. It's just straight up like, yeah, you buy the things at the shop and then that's it. That's all you have. Other states don't even have income tax. They just go, yeah, you earn the money that you got, but then you don't pay the state anything. Sure, you'll pay income tax to the federal government, but none to the state. Other states now have rules on like, yeah, so you want to say a big classic one I can think of is smoking cannabis. The federal government officially has a rule of like, yeah, no, you can't smoke cannabis. That's a Class A drug. But several dozen states have thought differently and now have rules in place saying, actually, we think that cannabis is all right and you should be able to smoke the stuff. These semi-sovereign, highly autonomous, different regions have real power over the lives and the fates of their people and of the country as a whole. And the boundaries and the exact patches of power that the states have versus that of the government ruling the whole thing is a constant source of tension and argument in the United States. Perhaps none encapsulate that argument more than the argument about abortion. Back in the 1970s, there was a court case before the Supreme Court. In Roe v. Wade, the woman, Roe, argued that she had the right to seek an abortion for a pregnancy that she did not want. The state, however, that she lived in had rules, as a state, that abortion was not allowed. The Supreme Court, it decided to rule that the state should allow abortion. This caused an uproar among many of the very religious communities in the United States and in all of those states that at that time had abortion be illegal. That many of them argued that as an individual state, they should in fact have the right to, write their own local abortion legislation, and that should be a power delegated, to individual states, not to the federal government. Whether it is or isn't is something I'm not going to go into today, but the bottom line is that it is an argument that still continues to this day, and it is one of but many discussions about where the sort of limits of federal power, the powers of the central government are, and where the powers of the state begins. The results, of course, can be both quixotic and hilarious. Many states have got very old laws in their books that have not been passed or were passed in some specific circumstance, which now, doesn't exist anymore. Like, for example, in the state of California, you're not allowed to have a bath with an orange. So watch out if you're going to have a bath. If you're going to go bathe with oranges, don't do it in the state of California. They're going to get you. Many states, of course, also have got very kind of unusual and strange things in their state constitutions and in their state apparatuses that actually end up having bizarre or tragic, often, because let's be honest, it's often tragic outcomes on the federal government as a whole. For example, remember when I was talking about the legislature? I was talking about the House of Representatives. Well, the states are in actuality the ones who decide the rules on, oh, how do we know which person we're going to send to the House of Representatives? In practice, almost all of them have the same idea. They go, we will have first past the post elections where we will send one person per one district and send them off. In addition, a lot of states go, oh, and we know the state government, the state legislatures, will reserve the right to draw those boundaries for those districts however we like. A situation that creates something called gerrymandering, where the politicians in the state governments end up drawing up their own boundaries for their friends going to the federal government to make sure that their party has the most power and the most representation in the Congress over what the actual people have wanted. That particular thing is actually but one of but many examples now of where it is increasingly becoming clear that the ideals that were put into the US Constitution and the practicalities of how the states are run and how they work are increasingly at odds. And increasingly, the problems are setting in. Over the course of the United States Constitution's existence, it has been amended 27 times. The 27th Amendment was passed in the 1990s, and it argued, quote, no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. Basically going, yeah, senators can't write their own law, can't write their own pay rules without, an election first. But that's a tiny amount of amendments. There have been, in the grand scheme of things, that's almost no change at all in the Constitution. And then don't forget that 10 of those amendments, the first 10, were all signed and passed at the same time in 93, sorry. I think it's pretty clear at this point that, yeah, there's actually quite a lot of stuff in the American Constitution that you could argue is getting pretty out of date. It's very unusual that the Constitution, in fact, has been amended so little. Switzerland's Constitution has been amended hundreds of times, and it's about the same age. Germany's Constitution was only set up after World War II, and yet it already has something like 80 amendments. The ditto for just about any constitution in any other democratic country. Yet America's Constitution has remained stagnant and has remained identical as the years turned into decades and the decades turned into centuries and the world around it changed. I think nowhere has this become more clear and become more obvious than in the Electoral College. As I now, from time of recording, now the various states are counting the votes for the presidential election. It's a very, very hair-raising, nail-bitingly close contest. At the moment, Joe Biden has 237 delegates pledged to him over the course of a great deal of states, whereas Donald Trump, the incumbent, has 213 delegates pledged to him, with it, having already secured a great deal of states for himself as well. But this is only really still so hair-raising and so nail-biting because it's being done state by state. If we were going purely off, people voting, we'd already have an easy winner. Joe Biden has over 5 million more votes than Donald Trump has. Joe Biden is, at time of recording, sitting on 69,638,000 votes, whereas Donald Trump is sitting on 66,707,000 votes. In just about any other system, that directly elects their presidents, Joe Biden would already be declared the winner. He has a very large margin over his opponent. But yet, the American Constitution outlines an electoral college, a delegate system for electing, and that's why we are now sitting here watching as a small number of states spend forever, counting votes that they were not prepared to deal with. And we, I guess, just hope and pray that when they have finally finished counting their votes, that in these specific individual jurisdictions, that more voters opted for the person that we like over the one that we don't. It's not even about, it's not even about almost like, Joe Biden has more votes nationally, so therefore he should be the president. It's about, no, but does Joe Biden have more votes in the state of Michigan? Does he have more votes in the state of North Carolina or Georgia or Arizona? Even though nationally, Joe Biden easily wins over his opponent, Donald Trump, we clearly have a system that doesn't go for that, doesn't value that. And we have a little word for things that are not representative of the democratic will, which don't follow how people vote. It's called undemocratic. It's called unfair. It's called unrepresentative. It's called obsolete. It's the same reason why I spend so much time and effort arguing for a change in the electoral system here in Britain. Because the votes of the people, the power of the people, is not represented. And that's being converted into policy outcomes across the United States as well. The United States is the only industrialized country that I know of with no universal health care. Instead, they keep having intense, weed-growing little arguments about, does the Constitution maybe somewhere, at some little part, have a part that justifies, universal healthcare, an idea that didn't exist at the time when the Constitution was written. Maybe the Constitution has actually some arcane procedure that, when you really look at it under a dim light and you kind of squint your eyes, maybe it will decide on whether net neutrality should be a thing for computers or whether it shouldn't. These kinds of arguments, these kinds of arcane deliberations would easily be solved if there was a way of amending the Constitution more easily and more efficiently than there is at the moment. It would even be better. If it was what people might consider, it could be changed too fast. Because the world is a fast-changing place, and the rules and the way in which your country governs itself sometimes has to change fast to go with it. And I would hope that at some point, the American political system does, pick it up by itself by the bootstraps and figures out some way to evolve and to reform faster than it does. because history has got a very, very clear message for governments and political systems that cannot reform. They die. They don't die in pretty ways either. But that was just in the realm of opinion. I am, however, in the meantime, finished with talking about the American political system. I hope that you have enjoyed this little lecture. Well, lecture is the wrong word, but like infomercial, maybe, on how the whole system works. Let's have a little recap just to remind ourselves on what it actually was in total. We had a country that was set up in rebellion, in a revolt. They feared power being concentrated in one person or one group of people, so set out to write a constitution against it. The constitution split up powers into three branches in the federal government. The legislature itself split into two groups that writes the laws. The executive, or the president, who has the ability to interpret the laws. To implement, the laws. And then the judiciary, the judges, who are the ones who interpret them. We also had all of this being presided over 50 individual, if you will, almost sovereign, semi-sovereign states that have a high degree of autonomy in deciding how they run themselves. Though we also found out that there are limits to what they can decide they want, both from the example of the federal government going, yes, well, actually, we want to take this power for ourselves and make a ruling here, or also in the case of the Civil War, when the federal government, smacked down some states that got way too big for their boots, and went, hey, no, we want to actually, we want to sort of keep slaves, even though we're deciding that we actually don't want them. We've also found out that the Constitution was unfortunately written to be very difficult to amend, very difficult to change, and that in the real world, its result has now increasingly been that the American political system has aspects to it that are stagnant, which don't change, which haven't evolved, with times that very much have been. And we've been seeing even some of the real world effects of this now, where now it's very real. There's a very real possibility now where yet again, the person with the most votes for the presidency might well lose it from time of recording. But what do you think? Do you have something to say? Do you think that I've now gotten something wrong in my discussions about the American political system? There are, of course, limits to what I could actually talk about. I could have talked about the real world ways it interacts with the world. I could have talked about, how the different departments are set up, the states. But frankly, that sounds like a really long time, and it sounds like way too much detail. And I think that it would be best if I just bid you adieu and went goodbye. Have a great day, and I hope to see you again next week, only on the Wednesday Witterer, only on on Relaks Radio. My name has been Jorge Shaft, and goodbye.
Relax Radio.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are in the world, you might be listening to Relax Radio from USA, or maybe from UK, or maybe from Bangladesh, or anywhere around the world. This is your host, Amin Raja, and I'll be with you for very little time because remember, we are on Relax Radio live on Facebook and YouTube as well. So you get to see us from wherever you are in the world, and you can participate